Hi there, hello, my name's Lines, great to see you. Now, as per your request, today we're going to go through and paint a few basic backgrounds. The idea for these is that it can serve as a starting point for you to start painting some more involving backgrounds and give a narrative or sense of place to your character illustrations, and hopefully save all your characters from having to exist in the lifeless white void. Now, I'm going to be showing all of them in real time. I'm not going to speed it up at all. I'm going to make sure I'm not going to use any tools that won't be available in basically every piece of standard digital illustration software, like Clip Studio Paint, Paint Tool SI, Ibis Paint, etc. Now, I'll also be using a very, very basic brush, which comes with all of your software. But if you can't find it, I can show you very quickly how to get to it or make it in Clip Studio at the start here, and those same instructions will work in basically any software, because there's only one or two steps. Now, I'm also very quickly going over the basics of how we're going to use layers to control what we're painting, and how to use a big brush to define details, and how a big brush is actually better to do fine details. And I'd also like to congratulate this month's winner of the server event for their amazing glow up of their before and after illustrations of their character. It has been wonderful to go through these. They've all been absolutely excellent. Here's just some of the other ones as well. If you'd like to take part in the next server activity, then pop on into our Discord, show your work there, and if you decide to paint along with these illustrations, I'd love to see your work posted in the Discord, in the homework channel, or some of your other excellent work posted in our finished art, work in progress. It's a great place and a great community for you to take part in if you want to, and the link is in the description. Now, if you like the video, hit like, hit subscribe, leave a comment to feed the algorithm, and if you are in a position to do so, you can join the Patreon there to help videos like this happen more often, or more reliably, or help me sort of expand their scope. I also do read all the comments and reply to almost all of them, so if you have a question or suggestion on the videos, or what sort of videos you'd like to see in future, then pop in there and I'll add it to the whiteboard. Now, let's begin with just a minute or two primer on those tools we're going to be using today. So, the question I get a lot is, what's your magic brush? How do you get the brush to do the things? Well, what is the brush? The secret is, there kind of is no brush. If you have a brush that's really magical and does something very cool, it's likely to also be very, very situational. If you have for those kinds of leaves and those kinds of grass, and in that kind of shape language. So those kind of out-of-the-box cool effects are wonderful, but they're very situational. So what we're going to do today is go over a very basic brush, and this is basically the only one I use, short of the soft airbrush for a couple of effects. So, I start with the soft airbrush. Comes with all the software. Then, I turn the hardness all the way up. There are no other steps. That's it. I use this brush for sketching, inking, coloring, shading, everything. It lets me have good control over light and dark. I can use it for pale sketching, and I can use it for heavier sketching or detailing. I can also use it for doing shading by just altering the size and controlling the pressure. It works well to blend, so I can grab some color and mix it in. It's a good all-rounder brush. The simpler the brush, the less situational it will be. Now the next thing is how to work with layers. So we'll have one tree and background all on one layer, and you can see the tree on the right is on a separate layer. Now if I want to erase some of the tree on the left, it takes away everything. It's all on one layer, so the tree and the background are all gone. If I want to narrow the tree, I have to paint over it with some bits of the background, and then grab some tree to fatten it back out again. And I have to do this for any bit of detailing I want to do. It's all on the one layer. But if I am very deliberate and I keep my elements separate, like the tree on the right, it's an independent object. So if I erase a section of it, then it just leaves the color of what's behind it, which is the background. If I carve into it, you can see that the background and the mountains will show through because it's a separate object. You don't have everything on a separate layer because that'll get a bit too cluttered, but if you know what things you're going to want to delete back out and paint back in, it can be really handy. So for like a secondary layer on top of the trees, I know I'm going to want to disturb the shape a little bit by carving it out, so I'll put that in a separate layer. Now the only other thing is, you can put a bit of glow over the top, this is the other effect, with a soft airbrush on a layer set to glow with about an orange color. Or you could use a blue to have some of the sky come through. So, let's have a look at how to brush in and out. So what I'll do, I have a big thick brush, I'll brush some in, and then I'll carve it out. So instead of using a little brush to do fine details, I can get really nice fine edges and control over thickness if I use a thick brush and I go in and out. That way I can have nice sharp edges and control. The other handy thing is it's actually a fair bit faster. So if I am going to shade in this triangle here. Now if I can't erase, so work in and out, what I'll have to do is use a really little brush to get the corners in, and then use a bigger brush to fill in the middle. But you can see on the right that if I can erase, so this is one of the advantages of working, at least temporarily, on multiple layers, I can delete things out, and then I'm done in about half the time. It's a really great way to speed things up, and also get a nice sort of smooth coverage of colour. And it's really handy for shading too. And there we are, we're done about twice as quick. Now that's all we need to get out of the way. Let's start our first painting. We'll start with a nice, bit of desaturated pale cyan for the sky. And then I'm going to grab another colour and we're just going to do the skybox. And so we'll just gently go in, and you can see it comes out looking kind of green, even though it's also a cyan. It's just a bit of a darker one with a bit of a hue shift on it. Now if you want the colours, you can just grab a screen grab of the colour palette on the left, or I can link a JPEG in the description actually, I might do that too. And that'll just have the colour palette on there that you can eyedropper it from. And so here you can see I'm just blending it in, grabbing the colour with the eyedropper to work back out, and I don't have to worry about it being too smooth. Don't worry too much about having really super smooth gradients. Having a bit of edge to it, a little bit of overlap, bit of brush stroke, that's fine. It looks nice. If things are too smooth, it can look a bit sort of unnatural and plasticky. So let some brush elements stay, you know, work light, relax. I feel like for a lot of these I should probably put on a large brown afro wig. Alright, that's a skybox there. I won't go down too far because I'm going to paint over the rest of this with mountains. Now, I'll grab a new layer. So the reason I'm grabbing a new layer for some of these and not others is that I want to be able to carve it out. So I'm going to grab another cyan, a little bit darker, and a little bit closer towards the warm end of things. And I'm just going to wiggle the line up here. I'm going to try and be really organic with it. I don't want to repeat too many shapes or it'll look kind of mechanical. If you imagine the difference between like mountain ranges and the teeth on a saw blade, is the teeth on a saw blade are very regular, they're very uniform. And so what that means is it'll look kind of mechanical if the shapes repeat too much. So I'll try to make sure I don't repeat the shapes very much at all if I can avoid it. And now that I've got that little edge bit in there, I can work bigger. And I'll try not to go over that edge there. Let's see how I do. That's looking nice. And you can see I'm not really keeping much of that gradient I made in the skybox there. The skybox is just there to give it a little bit of variation, just to stop it from being too cold and evenly mechanical. And so now, I've got a colour slightly more towards green. More sort of yellow colour. It might be a bit too bright. So what I'm going to do, I'll get the colour here and I'll just pop a little bit over the top. Like that. And what I can do is I can use the eyedropper to grab one of those colours from in between and start painting in that. So if you find it's a bit too bright, the colour you're dropping, and you want something closer to the colour you're going over the top of, you'll see me do this relatively often, where I'll grab a colour in between from the gradient using the eyedropper so I can find a darker or lighter or something in between the hues to do the colours. I'll get rid of the UI there, give ourselves a bit more real estate. And now I'm just going to fill in this range here. Now grab some of that mid there, and I'm just going to add a bit of variation here. So I'm not having one big block. I'm just going to disturb it with some shapes here. The viewer's going to have to rationalize what these are. Maybe they're a darker field or whatever. Don't worry too much about the details. It'll all work out. And so I've just got a bit of a darker color there. And then I'm going to grab a bit more of that green. And you can see I'm changing my colors using the actual canvas. You can work from your palette if you like, that's up to you. But if you've already painted on the canvas, you can hold Alt on the keyboard to switch to your eyedropper, and then you can just grab a color there. And it's actually a good habit to get into because it helps you grab things like mixes of colors. So if you need a mid-tone, but on your palette you only have a light and a dark tone, it can be good to just grab a mid-tone from the thing you're working on. So here I'm getting more of a in-between color for the top of the mountains there, sort of mix it out. It's looking a little better. And again, grabbing a bit of mid-tone there just to help that blend. And then going a slightly lighter color in here, just as we get closer to the viewer. Now you'll notice that as things get further away, they're going to get sort of more blue and more washed out. So those greeny hills, you'll check if you have a look at the color palette, they're actually a cyan. And a slightly warmer cyan on a cyan will look green by comparison. So we're going to have vibrance through relative color strength. So if you're used to using digital, one thing I'll see a lot with people new to digital is it's very easy to go too saturated. That one happens a lot. In fact, it's happening to me right there. That blue, it's a bit too saturated, it's a bit too blue. I grab it with this green. I'm just going to mix a little in to try and dull that down a touch. Right, I'll start on the line down here. I wanted to find where the shadow is going to be. That's another thing with painting, is you've got to have a relatively solid plan in your head for what you're going to paint, to know what you're going to do on top of what. So in this case, I'm going to be doing a tree with some vibrant orange leaves in the middle of a relatively green field of grass next to some mountains. Now the plan for this is because I want a lot of contrast between it and the mountains so it can stand out. I don't want to have to make it bright orange by hitting the saturation slider too hard. Rather, I'm going to give it a bunch of stuff to contrast off of. So I'll have kind of desaturated bluey greens in the background, which will make its oranges stand out really brightly, even if they're not very saturated. And now I'm just filling in the shape for the shadow of the tree here. Since I'm going to have to build it essentially from the back to the front, the tree will be going on top of the shadow, and the shadow goes on top of the grass. So it's grass, then shadow, then tree. And there's some tricks we can do around the edges of the grass shadow here to make the rest of the grass look like grass. This is going to be our implied detail, where we can use the edge of something to communicate the rest of it. We'll get to that in a second. I'm just going to neaten up some of the shapes here, just a little bit, and maybe change them a little bit. Make sure that the shapes are kind of stretched out left to right. It can be very easy when you're drawing these shapes to have the shape be a bit too tall, top to bottom. In perspective, it should be nice and narrow, left to right. So I'm just going to make sure it's stretched out left to right. The actual accuracy of the shape is of no real importance. It's just got to be roughly the right size and use roughly the right shape language, and we should be okay. Now here, I'm going to grab that proper grass color, that brighter, more verdant color. This is going to give the grass a bit more life to it. Now you'll notice this is very nearly a straight yellow. Now it might be a little strong in some places, and honestly, thinking about it now, I should have potentially done this down first before I did the shadow, but we are where we are. I think if actual Bob Ross were here, he'd just call this a happy accident. And, you know, it did actually end up having a good effect because it gives me a nice grade between that sort of yellow green, or the very, very verdant green, or almost a sort of greeny yellow, and the rest of the grass there. Because the rest of the grass, I want that to be fairly dull. I want the grass to have more life to it in the foreground. So I'm not just going to make it more saturated, I'm going to change the hue to make it a bit warmer. Because you can see we have a lot of cooler colors in the background, but we have warmer colors as we come forward. we have a lot less contrast in the background, and we have a lot more contrast in the foreground. That's going to bring the viewer's focus towards the foreground. The viewer will naturally be drawn to areas of high contrast, both color contrast and value contrast, with color contrast being the difference in the hue of the colors, and value contrast being the difference in how light and dark they are. I'm going to go over and pick a right color. I want maybe sort of I'm trying to grab the right green. This is probably a bit saturated, but let's give it a burl and see what I get. That's far too saturated. That's the other thing, is when you start working with very low saturation, you really can't go very high saturated with it because it'll look out of place. So here I'm having to go with a saturation that's probably not more than about 20%, and even then it's probably a bit high. So I'm going to mix in a bit of that cyan to subdue it a bit, and that'll get me the right color. So I can grab colors from other parts of the image, and mix them in to try and bring it closer to that color. So just going over it very gently with my brush to make a bit of a half tone, and then I can eyedropper that and expand out from there. And so I'm just going to give a bit of shape and some implied detail to the area behind where the tree will be before I start adding the tree in. I'm just doing a bit of dark shape here. Maybe it's like a little hedge, or a little bit of shrubbery, or a little sort of bit of brush. I'll grab a bit more of that color as well. And I'm just going to take it to a different hue, maybe lift it a little bit. Just make a bit of a variant color of it to throw in there as a sort of like a tree line kind of thing. And I'll grab some of this sort of background color and just make it a touch warmer. Too saturated. Pull it down again. That's a bit better. A little dark, but it'll be okay. And again, this is just me putting in some bits of sort of shrubs or brush and making them a color that's relative to the part of the canvas they're on. So you can see with all of them, I'm mixing them from one of the colors that's in the area I'm painting it in. And so here I just want a bit of a slightly different plane across this bit of grass here. So I've painted some in, I've grabbed a mid-tone between the color I painted in and the color it's on, and I'm using that to paint some stuff in. I'm just going to flatten in the area of the grass in the front there, and then grab a slightly brighter one, more yellow, just to add some focus leading into the real foreground area. A bit more around the back there, and just adding more to really bring the viewer towards this front area here before I pop the tree in. Right, now I'm going to grab a bit of orange. Now this orange is going to be the same as the orange for the leaves of the tree, but I've got a duller variant of it. This is going to be just for some fallen leaves. I don't have to draw actual leaves, I just need to have some blobs of colour, and the fact that there's a tree that's going to have leaves of this colour is going to connect those two bits of information to the viewer. So they'll see these little blobs that are just here and there, very irregularly placed, and they'll connect the dots, and they'll feel like these are leaves, but if you zoom in on them, they're blurry little blobs. That doesn't matter. What matters is we've got them connected, narratively, to the tree. So I'll have some that are blown off over the hill there, and other little bits, and making sure that I use smaller blobs the further away I go from the tree. There we go, and larger blobs as you get closer to the tree, closer to the viewer. Now I'm going to grab some of the colors for the actual tree itself. Now, planning wise, I've got 2 colours for the foliage and 1 colour for the trunk. I'm actually going to start with my darker colour for the foliage first. This is because layers wise, I'm going to start with my darker foliage colour, and over the top of that, I'm going to paint my trunk. And then over the top of that, I'll paint the lighter colour. This layering will just be a natural way to get the tree to have those sort of planes. So I'm just going to do the very loose shapes here you can see for the darker colour of the foliage. And I'll have a little mini tree next to it, I think. Now the shape on this doesn't really matter, and you'll notice this is on a new layer as well. So this lets me carve in and out with the edge of the tree. So I'm going to do some shaping on this, on a new layer, with the eraser, and since this is on a new layer, I can work back and forth with it. So I'm just doing a bit more sort of detail-y shade here. I'm not paying a lot of attention to it. It's going to have another layer on top of it. I'm just erasing some out and putting some in to make some of those negative and positive shapes. So a bit more sort of negative shapes in there, just some gaps so I can have some light coming through, because the tree will never have like absolute coverage. So just carving some bits out and then filling them back in almost, so that they're being filled in with those positive shapes of the brush. And just a few more, I'm just sort of working my way around the tree, cutting some bits out, adding some edges, cutting some bits out, and that's it. And then some towards the bottom here, just to really sort of disturb that shape. So you can see I've just sort of started with a big blob, that's why the brush was so big when I was blobbing it in, and now my much smaller brush I'm using to carve it in and out. Now there's little leftover bits of tree there, there's some bits that are left over, that's fine. A painting can be a bit messy, doesn't really matter. It can be read as being detail for the tree, a leaf at an angle. I don't really have to worry too much about it. I can just let it be whatever it looks like. If it's a problem, I'll fix it. But until it's a problem, I'll just let it be there. And so I'm working my way around. I'm just getting around to the top here. I'm adding some more sort of mass there. I feel like I let the top be a bit thin. I'm going to fill it in a bit. That looks pretty good. And I'll start on the next sort of blob down. And so I'm adding detail out and sometimes digging some shape in, but mostly in, and just sort of have fun with it. Just sort of start feeling the shape, what we want to have, see if it feels like a leaf, let it be messy. Again, this is all going to be implied detail here, so we won't have to worry too much about having accurate leaf shapes. This won't be any kind of discernible tree based on leaves. It'll just be a tree, and that's enough. Pull that in there a little bit, so really narrow the shape there, because it was looking a bit too much like the blobby shape of the section above it. That's looking pretty good. Maybe fatten out some of these little shapes there. That looks nice. And a bit more there, leaving lots of nice little gaps. I'm trying to be fairly even with the gaps as well. So, that's that. Now, new layer. This one's going to be the trunk. So I'm going to grab this very subdued, sort of purpley brown, and I'm just going to start roughing in the shapes. Now I'm going to delete these out a bit later. I just want to sort of feel where I want them to be. And I'm going to shape them by erasing them in and out as I go. So I'll have this just connecting up there, and just sort of connecting vaguely in over the top of these leaf shapes to where I feel like they need to be, and I can adjust the width and smooth the edges in a bit. This is on a separate layer. I can cut in and out. And I'll have a separate little mini tree next to it. I think that's quite nice. And just rough them in, and I can cut the internal shapes in and out as well if I want. That's looking okay. I can get a smaller brush and now start drawing in some of the finer details and cutting out some of the edges. I'm cutting out some of the sides of the branches. and in, and just smoothing them out. And just sort of working in and out, to and fro. Adding a bit more in there. A bit more on this branch here. And back in and back out. Now your tree is probably going to look a little different, so don't get hung up on it looking anything like mine. Mine doesn't look anything like any real tree out there, so don't worry too much. There's no correct or incorrect with tree. So long as you've got a trunk on the bottom and leaves on the top, you've covered the basics. Good. Another branch coming up here, coming in behind a little blob there, and then just thinning and thickening and thinning and thickening as I feel like it. Remembering a lot of this is going to be covered by the layer of leaves on top, so don't worry too much about it. Again, none of these have to be taken to 100%. At most, only about 60-70% of anything we do is going to be visible. All the background has now got tree on it. All those leaves have now got branches on them. And all these branches are going to have more leaves on top of them. So don't get too hung up on it. If it doesn't look alright, it'll look alright when it's finished. Fill that up there. Let's have a branch here. Mainly this is just going to be so I can have a bit of brown showing through the leaves on top. So whether it's in the right place or not, the right thickness isn't shockingly important. Adding a bit more in there. Off to the other side. A bit more under there, just to show through. There, I want some brown coming through. Just to show there's sort of branches coming through the whole thing. One of the other things that can really help with shaping just simple branches is remembering that everything will go from thick to thin as it goes from the trunk up towards the branches. So, if your branches up the top are really thick, but your trunk's really thin, it can make it look a little off. The shape doesn't really matter, but the overall shape language kind of does. So, have them get thinner and spindlier the further away you get from the ground. And that'll help that shape to communicate right. So, now on this little sidey branch bit here. And just doing a bit of reshaping, adding, subtracting. A little second mini branchy bit there. Looks nice. And just sticking out that main trunk. Looks okay. That's looking alright. Widening the gap between those branches there. Making the bottom one a little bit more spindly. I like spindly, it's my word for the day, I think. A bit more brown there to come in front of those bits of backing leaves there. A little bit there, just so I can have a bit to show through when I draw the branches on top. Just widening and narrowing them. A bit more there. The trunk needs a bit of tidying up, definitely. It's a bit sort of squat, looks kind of like a weird hand. That's okay. I can narrow it a bit, I can thicken it a bit. It's on a separate layer. And I can merge it later if I want, but I don't really feel like I'll need to. Just want to make sure I don't have too many layers as I go forward. I'll just thicken that bit up there. Yeah, it's alright. One thing that's also really good to save time is that with switching between the eraser and the brush, remember that there's a key to just switch your brush to be an eraser. So by default in Clip Studio I think it's C, in Paint Tool Sign I think it's minus on the keyboard. Most feature complete software will enable you to switch between this brush and this brush as an eraser. So I've just got my finger on the keyboard, leaning on the C key, to switch me between my brush and my brush as an eraser. The reason that's better than switching to just the actual eraser is that the eraser will not be the same size and shape. So here I've got my new layer, and I'm going over with the bright orange. Now, let's get the rest of this in, and you can see I'm just going to do a few more bits of shape there, or the leaves. And add them in. Mainly as a big mass, I just want to make sure I leave some gaps to show that darker color through. And I want to leave some gaps as well to show those branches through as well. So I'm just going to make sure I've got some of those shapes in, and I'll let myself have some areas where it's just not covering it. There's no point in having those backing leaf shapes if I'm going to cover all of them. And you can also see, since I'm going a lot higher than the backing leaves, the image overall of the tree, well, the tree itself, is going to be a bit taller now that I've got that. So if I haven't left myself that space, that's fine. And now I'm just adding some more in, trying to have some sort of edges to it. Those little sort of bits of the leaves showing through. That should look nice. Making sure I'm leaving some gaps there. Nice sort of solid bits of leaves there. And that'll help me get some depth. So as long as I've got the two different tones of leaves and some of the shaded branches visible through, I should get the illusion of tree. Depending how we go. Alright. A bit more across there. And try to have a big sort of surface plane. Leave nice big channels where there's gaps so I can see through that backing layer of leaves as well. And then moving on to this little branchy bit here. I'll see how I feel about that branch on the left side of the big section. So I'll think about it for a second. So I'll go and do something else for a while. I'll do this branch here. I'm just filling it in, just random shapes. I don't really have to worry too much about it. As long as it's messy, the viewer will interpret it as leaves, probably. A bit more under here. Let's give a bit of edge there, leave some gaps. And then move on to the little mini tree. Again, squiggly shapes. I'm not going to worry too much about it. Just make sure I leave some gaps for the backing and branches to show through. Primarily, the gaps will be on the bottom right of them. The light is coming pretty much from above, but I'll give it a little bit of a bias towards the left, and that'll let the shadows come through on the bottom right. And making sure I don't be too clean with it, leave some of the little bits of purple showing through. That's looking alright. And now I'm going to grab a sort of in-betweeny colour with my eyedropper. And make sure the eyedropper is set to pick display colour too, otherwise it'll just grab from what's on the layer. And I want to grab that mix between the two layers. Alright, now I'm going to start adding a little bit of internal detail here. So I've got a colour that's in between the two, and I'm just going to add some little shapes there to imply sort of planes or tufts or sort of groups of leaves together. And I'll do a little bit on the transitional edges there between one bit and another, but I won't do it everywhere. I want some sort of fairly hard cutoffs as well as these sort of mixed areas there. If everything's got the same sort of rounded cutoff, rounded transition, then none of it will really read as a tree. It'll just be sort of a rounded shape. So not doing too much, a little bit there, and try not to do any on top if I can avoid it. And then a bit around here, and I'm trending it more towards the sort of lower right edges to sort of simulate or sort of emulate a bit of a gradient there. And then doing some bits coming out loose, they don't have to be tethered to the blob. A bit more there. And a little bit as they come out. I'm going to grab somewhere in between as well. I'll start doing some on this lower section here as well. And a bit more around the edges there. 2903, 2904, 2905. And just messing in some shapes there, just to give it a bit of implied texture. Again, not drawing individual leaves. The viewer can make the leaves in their own head. Let them put a bit of work in. I'm doing the drawing, they can do their job. And a bit more under the side there. That's looking alright. Trying to make sort of larger planes of it if I can too. And then continuing some of the shapes out there with some of the leaves that'll be showing up over the top of the other ones. Grabbing a shade again in between the two, so one that's even closer to that sort of backing colour. There's some fills there, because that bit looks a bit too dark, but I don't want to have it sort of fighting for that highlight, that sort of brighter orange. So I'm going to let it have a bit of depth, but I'll keep it in a fairly low range. So like here, I'm going to grab some of that mixed colour, and I'll start adding a bit to the edges there with that mixed colour. And I'll also have a few little bits of leaves coming down as well, because if there's leaves on the ground and there's leaves on the trees, surely there should be some in that sort of transitional phase between the two. And here I've grabbed some of that darker purple colour, and I'm working on top of my current layer, and I'm just adding a few bits of detail in there just to really sort of cut them in a little bit. And now a few more little falling leaves. Again, they don't have to be leaf shaped, they just have to be blobs, and the viewer will figure it out. The viewer is clever. You have to trust the viewer. That's looking alright. Now, I'm going to start doing a bit of a detail trick to make that shadow look like it's a shadow on grass. So, if the grass that is in shadow is tall, then some shaded grass will come up above the edge of the shadow. And so that's what you're going to see there. You'll see little bits of grass that are in the shadowy area popping up. And so just having a few little bits of shadow like that coming up will make the edge look like there's some bits of grass. That sort of natural variance. I'll do that on all these upper edges of the dark shape of the grass. This is something I got from, I forget the name. It was an observation of a Ghibli movie, Totoro, where they had the backgrounds that look really detailed, but actually a lot of implied detail with how they paint the edges of shadow to make the rest of the grass look like detailed grass. So here I'm doing a bit more, those little bits of upward spike wherever I go from dark shadow into light grass. Just going to add that up there. Now the reason I'm doing this last is I might have had things like some leaves really close to the edge, and so that dark shaded bit of grass, I want that to show up over the top of that bit of leaf there. So it's got to be one of the last steps, depending how you do it. I'm doing a bit more around there. Now I'm going to grab just a mix between the two of the light and dark bit of grass, and I'm just going to add a couple of little tufts there. So I don't want that full dark shaded areas dark sort of shadowy color, because that'll be too strong. That'll pull too much focus away. So I'm getting a darker green that's a mix between the two to add some just areas of like darker patches of grass or darker sort of blades. You won't get an exactly even green on grass. Grass is primarily not bright green, it's more of a sort of yellowy verdant green. Well, quite often it's yellow. And it's never really even in color across its entire length. Now here I'm doing the other thing. So where you saw me drawing on the upper edge of shadows, the darker color, if I grab some color from the bottom edge, I can go up. So I'm just going to do a bit more detail in before I do that to the main shadow. I'm just going to grab a nice transitional color there, just to add a few little bits of detail, sort of grass tufts there. Like you can have a bit of grass that's long enough to cast its own sort of shadow on itself. So just a little bit more there, and working back and forth. And just other little bits of detail around here. Also remembering that as I work into the background, if I'm doing a region of color, I want to make sure that I'm doing a larger brush, but if I'm doing little detail-y bits, I want to make sure I'm using a fairly fine brush, and finer the further back I go. Right, that's looking pretty good. Right, now I'm just going to grab a slightly darker version of the shadow, and I'm just going to throw a few little bits of grass detail in here so it's not too flat compared to the grass around it. Even though it's shaded and it'll have a lot less detail, I still want to have a little bit of detail to it. And so here, I've grabbed some of that lighter color of the grass, and now I'm imagining that there are well-lit blades of grass in front of the shadow. And so they'll have little bits pop up. This bit, for me, is pretty challenging to avoid having too much of a mechanical rhythm, to having the tufts of grass be the same size and shape. So I'm really going to try and put effort into varying how big and how small and how far apart these tufts of grass are. So there I've got a bit more, and you can see now when I look at the shape of the shadow on the grass, it really gives an impression that it's not just on a green sort of mat, but rather it's over the top of some grass. And so here I'm just checking for areas where I feel like a little bit more detail and polish could be added. The image is largely finished. So now I'm just doing a bit of fine-tuning, letting myself have a nice small brush to do some fine details. I don't want to be using a small brush from the get-go. I'm going to grab a little bit of a mix between it and see if I want to add a bit of reflected light onto the underside of the trees there. I probably don't. The solid color's working quite well, but we'll see how we do. Because you will get a bit of that sort of that ambient reflected light down towards the base of the tree. But again, doesn't have to. That's looking okay. So any other sort of detail things I want to add? Maybe a bit of sort of scumbling that background there a little bit. Maybe dividing it up a touch. We'll see how we do. I'm just seeing any areas where I feel like there's any just last little touches of detail I feel like would add to it. I shouldn't be adding too much more to the background just because the background, I don't want that to sort of come forward too much. I'm just going to sort of add a bit of dark that sort of leads in towards the tree. I just want a bit of a leading line from the flow of the hills in the background that'll sort of come in towards this tree a bit, is what I'm after. Just want a bit more of a shape there. Erase it in. Grab some of that green and go over the top. That's looking nice. Yeah, that's looking good. And I'll grab a blob of that grass and then mix it up and just use that to get a bit of a mix for that background area there, a little sort of mini sort of crest to the hill. Looking good. And with that, I'll call that finished. So we've got a tree in a field. Now, you could use this, place a character in front of it, you can place a character sitting under the shade of a tree, you could crop in really far and have it be a much more close-up shot. There's a lot you can do with these basic elements, even if you just decide to use this as a way of doing grass and grass shadow. Whatever you decide to go with, that's something you can use this for in the background of an image. Now, what are we going to do next? So, for this one, let's do a nice indoor shot. So we'll just do a doorway. You can have a doorway for someone standing in a doorway. It's essentially just how we're going to do bits of the room, and we'll have all those bits all gathered together in one place. So to start off with, I'm going to have a doorway. Now I'm going to eyeball the perspective. I'm going to use some perspective tools adjacent a bit later on, but the reason I don't want to use them from the get-go is that I want the image to be composed according to what I want it to look like, not what perspective wants. So I'm going to get a vague idea of how I want the image to look, and then after that I'm going to get some perspective tools and see if I can make it make sense. But I'd like it to look cool and make sense, but if I can make it make sense but I can't make it look cool, well, there's no point in making sense, is there? So I'm going to eyeball it, have a rough guesstimate of how things should look, and then I'll get in and try and get the perspective to look about right. But for now, it's a doorway, it'll be a bit wider towards the top, and I'll have some converging lines here. Now, if you're interested in getting really stuck into perspective, I've got my video on perspective, which you can watch. It's great. And it covers a whole bunch of really cool mind-melting perspective stuff. Now, I've got them vaguely in the right sort of place. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grab the whole sketch and transform it teensy-weensy. Now you can use the actual perspective tools in Clip Studio. They've got actual perspective tools in a bunch of the programs. I'm not going to use them. I'm just going to use a new layer, low opacity, and I'm going to get my brush and I'm just going to shift, click, to draw a straight line. So if you draw a dot, hold shift, draw another dot, it'll draw a straight line between the two. And so I'll have my vanishing point be, it looks like about there. And I'm just going to do some lines, just some radiating, roughly accurate guidelines for myself, radiating out from that point. And that'll help me set things like where the sides of things should be. If you have perspective, parallel lines will converge on the vanishing point. So the floorboards are parallel, and the lines along the wall are all parallel. They're going sort of left to right along the house. So now I'm going to do my horizon line, which is where the vanishing points will converge. Since I've got a vanishing point, obviously the horizon line must be on that. So draw a line through there. And now I've got my other point of perspective. That sort of tilt to the floorboard there, the doorway, sorry, the bottom edge of the doorway. Well, that must be going off to my other vanishing point. That's 2 of my 3 points in my 3-point perspective. And then I'm going to have the doorway narrowing as it goes down, which means I'm going to have a vanishing point way down below. And that should be fairly straightforward. So I'll zoom out. I'll draw some lines along these doorways. Figure it should be down there-ish somewhere. Again, near enough is good enough. I think it was Krusty the Clown. It's not just good, it's good enough. So we're going to take the Krusty the Clown approach to perspective. Ah, beautiful. All the guidelines I'm going to need. Alright, now with that, I'm just going to see how I feel about some of the shapes. If I sort of follow along roughly towards the guidelines. Yeah, that's looking good. I can go sort of fairly close to parallel on them. That's looking alright. Yep. I like the feel of that. I'll put the cupboards and everything. I'm just going to try it out and make sure I like the feel of it. Yep, looks good. Alright. So now, I'm going to fill it back up into the frame. Now, since it's so big, if I use the free transform tool, the edge is going to be huge. So I'm just going to delete all this excess stuff out, because I don't need it. I'm just going to get a big marquee tool, the big selection tool, grab whole sections of it, and I've got all my layers selected, you can see there, and hitting delete to clear all them out. And then I've got all my layers selected, Control T on the keyboard, free transform. There's a bit outside the frame that I missed. So I'm just going to grab all these, I'm going to move them over, and get rid of that excess bit. Get my big marquee tool here, and delete. Lovely. Alright, now I'll fill that back into the frame, since it's got all its perspective working right. So I'll put in the middle, I'll hold Shift and Alt. That just means it'll expand out from that center cross area, and I'll just arrange it to where I feel like I want it to be in the frame. That's looking about right. There we are. There's my perspective all set up. Now, it would probably be quicker to use the tools, but not every program uses the perspective tools in the same way, but every program can draw lines, so we'll do this instead for now. Alright, now with that, I've got my vague outline of the sketch, with the perspective worked out to where I wanted the layout to. So I've got that, I'll lower the opacity down on that. This is going to tell me where things have got to be. So I'll grab myself, my brown here, and I'll start just banging out my lines for it, in fact. And so, click, shift, click. to make my shapes for all my bits of doorway and so forth. Now I have a bit of an unfair advantage here since I'm planning some renovations, and I've been looking at a whole bunch of sliding doors from the Hammer Barn catalogue, for those of you across the pond. And so I'll have the side of the door frame here, and then I'll have a bit of a join for the banister, where it joins up, and then the banister dashing away, and then coming up. I might actually have that be the edge of like a little sideboard. I like to have a little sort of sideboard with an opening top for shoes and so forth. So now I've got to have that go back that way. And there again, just shift click, shift click. A bit more. Okay, that's looking good. A little bit of a join there. Not too easy. Grab my brown again. And draw a line up. A bit of the wall there. Joining lined up, that's okay. I want to have a little sort of a framed picture on the wall here, right up in the corner, because I want it to be in frame, but if I really put a picture in the corner right next to the door, there'll probably be a bit more space, but I just really want it in the frame, so I'm just going to ignore my interior decorating impulses. And now the other side of the door frame, a little lip there for the banister on that side. Come in a bit. And then come up. And I'll have that lip of the sideboard there. And then coming up and trying to keep it vaguely parallel. It doesn't have to be exactly parallel, just near enough will be good enough. And then a line down in here, because the door will be sort of coming over the side there. I might have like an actual like door and have it be open, so I'll do the inside edge of the hinges there. I'm just going to do really simple shapes. I'm just going to do some little grey sort of rectangles in there. Just make sure the rectangles, the top and bottom edge of those rectangles are going to be parallel lines that move towards the vanishing point. So make sure they're lined up. That's looking okay. Alright, what are we going to do next? Alright, there's a little bit of a corner in here. That's the only bit I think I've missed, really. A bit of an edge coming out there, the sideboard, and then that line there, but it wasn't quite... I've got to sort of imagine it going through there, off in towards that vague area of the vanishing point. As long as everything that's parallel in that way moves to and from there, I should be okay. Right, and I'll do the internal shapes of the picture frame. That should be easy enough. Alright, turn off the sketch. Yeah, it doesn't look like I'm missing anything. That looks like the inside of a room. Good-o. Alright, let's grab a new layer. I'll put that below, and I'll start with a base color. So that'll be my neutral sort of tan color. So it's sort of orange, it's very pale. And I'll get a slightly lighter color version of that. I feel like that'll work a little better. And then I'll get a darker color and start filling in the bits that I think would be the sort of darker wood joinery. There as well. I realised I don't have a top edge for the banister there, so I'm just going to pop one of them in and go back to my flats and pop that in there. The sole side sort of be wood, and the picture frame as well. The floor, I'm not sure if I'll use that same sort of wood. I want a sort of darker wood sort of finish for the front there, so I'm going to go just slightly off it with this colour here. So it's more of a sort of slightly more reddish, slightly darker colour. And then for the big sort of the void, I'm going to go with a brown that's a little more purple. You can see I've got a bit of a colour progression there. It's very subtle, but I'm going from more of a purple cool colour. And then into the foreground, a paler, warmer version of the brown. Alright, that's looking okay. So now, I'll have my shading layer. And I'll name this layer up here. That can be my line art. So you can see this drawing's coming together a lot more like a character illustration with things like line art and backing. So you can use the same sort of flow if you want. That's fine. Alright. I'm going to grab that sort of pale tan color. And I'm going to start using this as my shading color on a couple of bits. Let's have a look how we go. I don't know. Make a selection first, hang on. I'm just going to have a bit of a tan color on the paler areas, just a bit darker towards the top. I just want a bit of a gentle gradient between those two tan colors. Because the light is coming from above, then around the light will actually be a little darker if it's sort of a downlight. And most of the light in the room will be coming from the floor up. That's where it'll be sort of bouncing off of. And so now I'll have some cast shadows and just draw some lines in here to sort of imply things like the boards that they're connected with. And keep them vaguely in line with perspective as well. As long as they're roughly even, I should be okay. And a little shadow down the bottom there. Just that sort of ambient occlusion shadow. Oh, that's looking good. This is all working well. Right. I'll make a copy of the flats. I'll clip that to my shading layer. And now I don't really have to worry about what color I'm shading with, because it'll take all of its color information from the flats layer. I've got a little YouTube short about how this works, but it's just a simple way of shading with whatever color you want and having it come out right. So, a bit more here. So I'm just on my shading layer with my flats clipped, or copy of my flats clipped above it. And I'm just sort of seeing where I want to have a bit more shading, so a little bit more down towards the corner here. They're my sort of darkest bits of shading. And I'm going to lower the intensity of my shading layer. It's just a bit too dark, a bit too strong. Bit more up there as I walk up. Alright. Draw a little bit of a line up there and make a selection. So this is the marquee selection polygon tool. So you can just go click, 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 and it'll make sort of nice big square selections. So if I'm working within a selection, that means that the brush will only happen inside those running ants. So it's a good way of getting a bit of a gentle gradient from dark to light, but not having an effect that side there. I do want a gentle gradient there, but I want them to be slightly different, because that'll make it look like two separate surface planes. I'll just make another little selection there. I'll zoom in because it keeps closing the selection. Now I'm just going to go over that and cut some out to make a little bit of variance there. Alright, looking good. My sketcher there. I'm just going to add a little bit of darker lines across here, just for a little sort of the thread and the little, what should we call it, little sort of the rubbery bits you have underneath the doorways. I think it's for stopping the draft. So just a few of them, just to imply the sort of stuff there. And then I'll go over them and just partially erase some of them, just to lighten them a little bit, just to make it a little more of an organic sort of shape. And then adding a little bit of shadow to the top of the banister there. That's okay. And a little bit of shadow under the lip there. That little sort of sidey cupboardy thing. A bit more underneath as well. And I'll sort of imply that sort of panel detail on the inside of it as well. Darken that little corner there for a bit of ambient occlusion. And then one or two little bits of implied line coming up and down to sort of communicate that sort of wood paneling around the edge there. Right, now, I'm thinking I want a bit of a sort of a tan tile pattern here. So I'm just going to do some lines across like that. I'm sort of figuring out where I want the tiles to be. I'll do a sort of brick pattern tiles, making sure I'm going to and from where that vanishing point was, roughly. If you need to turn the sketch layer back on to remember, that's fine. I probably should have, but I didn't because I'm silly. And now that I've got these sort of basic shapes in, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to add some little organic bits to them. Just some bits of like cracked rock, like corners. Take some of the corner off, and cut in and out. And just make it look a bit more sort of integrated. So it's not a sort of alien bunch of artificially drawn lines. I'm just going to have some irregularity there, some sort of gaps, some filled in bits. That's a bit better. Shaving some off the corners there. And might even have some cracks coming in from the doorway there, so I'll draw them in thick and then cut them away. Make them thin. I don't need a lot. I just need one or two cracks to really sort of, you know, imply the rest. Now I've got my selection, and I've selected that sort of doorway area. And so now I'm going to draw some lines into the dark doorway. And that's not working, so I'm going to draw some lines out instead, so I can do them from the vanishing point. Now, what's beyond this doorway? I don't really know. I don't really care. I'm only going to have it lit with the lighting from the room that we are in. And so it'll have a shadow cast by the doorway, darkening basically everything in that room. And so now, I've got a lot of my tolerance, so I just select that area there. Make sure I'm on my shading layer, and I'm going to start shading it all out. Because there will be some light from the room we're in, with that sort of downlight, that's going to light up some of the floor in the next room as it sort of radiates out, but it won't get all the way in. So I only have to do a little bit for it to work. In fact, I might cut a bit more off. Yeah, it's looking okay. Alright, groovy. Now, to get the shade to really work, what I might do, I'm going to grab some of this here. I'm going to add a bit more darkness around the sort of doorway there, just to sell the sort of the dark doorway. A new layer on top. I've just made that. I'll call that one highlights. And now I'm just going to add a couple of little bits of lighter area. Just do a couple of things, just to make them look like the edges of things. I'm not going to add a lot of detail to any of this. This is a background. So with a lot of these backgrounds, they're quite often going to be like blurred all the way out, or they're going to be defocused. Or you just don't want to have a lot of detail on them, because that will compete then with the detail of your character. So these are different from a landscape image, where a landscape image is about detail for you to get involved in. This is for detail for you to not really get too involved in, but that will still communicate a place and help you with a narrative. Because all images do have narrative. If you have a character, well, that character has a height, a weight, a gender, a clothing choice. All these things give them character and a place in the world. If you have someone who's in, caveman furs, and they're in the middle of a coffee shop, you have narrative, because you have elements of place and you have a character, and that character will then set a narrative. You now have a time traveler, or you have a really misplaced Starbucks, but I guess they are everywhere now, so why not? And now I'm just going to do a few more bits of highlight just on the big sort of planes. You can see I've done a couple little shreds of it. A couple little bits on the top of the banister there. I don't want to do too much going into that sort of corner, because it'll be between that sort of the cupboardy thing and the doorway there. I probably should have just joined them together, but no. And now I'm doing just a little bit of shine, a little bit of sort of highlight, just on that sort of front cornery bit there. And I'll do a few more little bits of shine on the tiles here as well as the door treads, just to make them look like they've got that sort of that lip, doesn't that sort of lifty bit? I used to trip on them when I was a kid. Those little metal things you had between doors. A little bit there on a little banister as well. Not putting them everywhere, just putting them in a few spots, and the bits where I don't put them, they will still kind of be there, because if I've done a good enough job of implying them in the spots they are, then the viewer will kind of assume that they're there in the spots that they aren't. And so for this top surface here, I'm just going to fill the whole thing in, and maybe do one or two strokes here to sort of imply that sort of wood grainy texture. I'm just going to do a little bit here, just continuing that edge of the floorboard into the dark room there. This lets me sort of imply that these bits of detail extend beyond the edge of the shadow there, like there's some sort of highlights picking it up, like a bit of a shiny edge there. Let's put that in nice and gentle. Very nice. And I'll do a couple of little bits of shine on these bits of broken tile. Trying to remember to get the sort of the direction right. So they're being lit by the light source in the room. So front, maybe the ones on the left need to be, I don't know, I'm not sure. But just so they're broadly facing the right way, and I should be okay. I'll only do a couple of them anyway. The rest of it will be implied. Implied detail's great. Alright, here we are. Now, one other thing I want to do is the shade in the room. I just want that to be a little darker. So I'm just going to add an extra bit of shading to it. Just in the room there, just to really sort of drop it out there a little bit. So it's really gentle. I've got my big soft airbrush, which is a brush you only use for effects, but that's what it's for. All right, with that, I've got, now I might just get my line art to make a copy of my flats layer instead. So you can see I've used the copies of my flats layer to sort of control things like line art. So I've clipped one there to the line art. And what that's done is it sort of paled some sections of the line art, which is great, but then it's got some sort of messier sections there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a Gaussian blur to blur that copy of the flats that I've clipped to the line art. I'll go filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and then if I blur that copy of the flats that I've clipped to my line art, it'll let some of those flats colors bleed in, and it'll soften some of those colors in the line art, and just sort of soften it overall, help it sort of integrate a bit better. That's looking okay. Alright, I'll grab a little bit of purple here on a new layer, set to normal, on a big soft airbrush, and lower the opacity just so we can see through it a little bit. And I'm just going to do a bit of a color hierarchy pass. This is a bit of post-processing, so I'm just going to get the soft airbrush. I've got a yellow and purple. I've got a bit of a warmer yellow. I'm going to brush some in towards the top of that nice sort of yellow. And then, towards the bottom, I'm going to brush some of that purple in. That. And a bit more purple in the doorway there. this is just to sort of set an overall temperature of the colors in those areas. A little bit of warm there, and now I'm going to switch that layer into, once I've got all the bits in, so I've got a bit more glow on the floor there, I'm going to switch that layer to overlay once I've got all these little bits in, and then I'm going to lower the opacity right down, just so I've got a little bit of a hint of that color hierarchy still visible. I've just got to merge visible to new layer, and I'm just going to set that to overlay and lower the opacity down a bit, and lower the opacity of that one as well. I want the effects to be there, but I don't want them to be too strong. Overall, I think we're going to take a little background. We can put a character standing there if we want. We can have some eyes in the dark. So this is another very simple background you can put together for a character in a situation. You can have different aspect ratios, whatever you like. Alright, now the next one is we're going to do a sort of rocky, kind of post-battle-y landscape. So I'm going to start with a nice sort of desaturated, kind of orangey color here as my base color for the skybox. I'm just going to drop that in, bucket fill that, and now I'm going to grab a sort of orangey yellow, sort of desaturated halfway, and maybe start from there instead. And now I've got my kind of orangey color. I'm just going to go over the areas. Now in the frame, you get a short view in the corner there, and you can see that it actually is fairly different. And so I'm going to have a bit more of a sort of gentle blend between these two. I just want a bit of a gradient there. I could just use the gradient tool for this, but the gradient tool's gradient, it's a bit too neat. I want some strokes, I want some difference. Like the sky can be a really smooth gradient, but at the same time the sky can also have a lot of variability to it, a lot of streaks to it. So the kind of mess you make when you blend this manually, it gives you a bit more character and a bit more sky than just using the actual gradient tool. I'll put a bit more of a dark color in then up towards the top. I'm just going to block a whole bunch of it in. I'll get rid of the UI here. A bit more, and just sort of lighter strokes as I come down. And so I'll have a decent amount of color variance there. I'm going from like a purple to an orange to a yellow. I'm sort of sampling it and sort of blending it in as we go. I'm keeping some of that mess, just sort of grading it through. Grabbing the eyedropper tool, just to grab some of that color for the in-betweens. I can drop that in. And just grabbing that local color. And just sort of scumbling it in. There we go, that's looking good. A bit more on the sides there. Alright, that's looking okay. It's a little bit lighter, a little bit yellower. A little bit more. I'm going to have it lifting up a little bit more to the right hand side, so I don't want to be too sort of level. The sun's going to be off to the right there. Good. Nice and streaky, that's what I'm after. I'm probably going to end up covering most of this up anyway, so I don't worry too much about it. And now I'm going to start grabbing some bits of the gradient and going over it. So I want to have some clouds in there that kind of grade over the top. I'll grab a new layer for it just so I can cut them in and out. So I'm just going to add some sort of cloud shapes there. And the cloud shapes will get sort of narrower and stringier as they get lower. Because as things get towards the horizon, they get smaller. And so, well, they don't get smaller, they get viewed smaller. But with this, I'm going to draw them smaller and narrower the closer they are to the horizon, because that makes them further away. So I'm just going to have a bit of light shining through from some like cloud cover there that's coming over the top of that grade of the sky. But I want kind of a cloudy battlefield, so maybe I won't have like a formerly battlefield or apocalyptic wasteland or something. It's going to be a lot of implied shapes going on here. When you get the implied shape to really do a lot of the heavy lifting. And sort of blending that back and forth, just sort of getting it to a colour point that I like. Apparently it's a bit too purpley, I don't know. Might even have to get the blend tool out at some point. We'll see how we do. Yeah, it's looking like. Yeah, it's getting nice and sort of streaky. Yeah, it's looking good. I don't want it to be too smooth. I want a bit of mess to it, a bit of sky. That's looking a little better. A bit more. Put that orange in. That's looking okay. I'll work on a bit more of those little sort of cloudy detail bits down the bottom. Now that I've got that sort of grade above it looking nice. I'll sort of disturb some of these. I'll use a sort of lighter colour for it and go thinner and smaller as I get lower down towards the horizon. And then when I use that same colour there over some of the darker areas, it's going to come up as a bit lighter, which is nice. Alright, Rooney. Down here, sort of closer to a sort of desaturated blue. I'll start putting in the horizon line. So this one's going to be fairly low, so we're going to be viewing from a fairly low angle. So if the horizon's really low, then we're at a low angle. If the horizon's really high, we're at a high angle. And so we're going to be seeing things from very close to the sort of the ground. I'm just going to grab some colour here for the skyline. I might actually pick a bit more of the orange for it, just to have it sort of blending with that sort of that warm light of the sunset more. So I was going to go for a sort of desaturated blue for it, but it'd probably be sort of losing a lot of its own colour of that sort of dark bluey purple I'm going to go for. The further away it gets, and just picking up some of that neutral ambient light, and that'd make it a bit more of that sort of that orangey colour there. I'm just going to do some buildings, or maybe they're rocks or obelisks or something. I don't really know. Okay. I just want some shapes in there to make it look like there's some stuff in the background. Might even allude to a sort of second background layer there, and then throw the building in front of it. That could work. Yeah, it looks okay. A bit more of those buildings there, just sort of neatening them up a bit. That look okay. Looks nice. Now I might start on that sort of warm purple colour as a sort of layer in front. So grab another layer. Essentially making these like those backdrops in a play, where they're all those big sort of things of cardboard. So I'll have something that's sort of framing the image here, so I'll have it really coming into the frame a bit. It's sort of like a pillar-y, pylon-y thing, like a bit of a stone pillar. And having from the bottom of it, just a bit more of a blended colour. It's a bit too harsh there. The jump is a bit too much, so I'm just going to get a bit of a mix between it and that sort of orangey colour. So I can use that as a sort of intermediary colour between the two. And that's a bit nicer. It was a bit too harsh of a jump before. Go a little bit darker on that one. Let's put that one slightly forward. So as things come forward, they'll be a bit more sort of dark and a bit more sort of purpley. One of those sort of shapes there, these sort of stone pillar-y things. Oh, some notches out of it as well, just to make them look a bit weathered. I'll make the tops sort of more cornery. That's looking alright. Another one here. Another one there, and I'll sort of blue them in. I'll neaten them up after the fact. So I'm just going to get a few of the shapes in first. And get that sort of foreground plane going. So fill that in a bit. Blend some of that in a bit there, a bit with that. A bit too sort of harsh as it is, so I might just sort of blend it into the foreground colour a bit and just sort of lighten that first plane of the foreground colour. Yeah, it's a bit better. Of that, I'll just blend it. Now I'll grab a bit of a darker blue. I'll start on some of the closer stuff. Blurry pylon-y thing there. Let's get even closer. And you can see as I get darker, things will look closer. So this is that atmospheric perspective you've probably heard of, where the further away things get, the paler they'll get, and the more they'll trend towards, normally, a sort of cyan colour, or cyan blue, because the rest of the colours will die off. So it's not that it turns blue, it's that all the other colours sort of die off with what's in the air. But depending on what's in the air, different colours will die off. So if you're around a lot of gum trees, you'll get even more blue. If you're in somewhere really smoky or smog, it'll go really sort of yellow. So it really depends what's in the air for what colours will start to die off as they travel through those particles. And the more travel they have to do, the more that die-off will happen and the more they'll diffuse. And the more you'll lose those dark tones as that diffused light will fill in all those dark areas. So I'm just doing a foreground one there. It's a bit too blue. I'm just going to lower the saturation on this. It already feels like it's a bit too saturated, but that's okay. Because I want to save the saturation for the background primarily, because I want to have a bit of a glow coming through those sort of, you know, the ruins. Alright, I'm going to start on the shape of this big sort of stone gate here. This will be the primary kind of visual feature here. And it's still a background, but this could be a good device for sort of framing your character, like maybe they're between the gates, maybe they're in front of it, maybe they're standing underneath it, maybe they're on top of it, being all mysterious character-y. So I'm just going to pop that in there. I'm going to base it loosely on those Japanese mon, what are they called? I think it's just mon. And, or tori. And I'm just going to pop those shapes in there, and then make them more of a sort of stony, bricky version of that. So I don't want the sort of the nice, smooth elegance of that shape. I want everything here to be kind of sort of broken and stony and chipped. I feel like that's a good look for everything here. A little sort of cross-beam thing there. And then I'll sort of fill in some of the width there. I'm just going to play it by ear. Should be okay. Just fill that in. I'm on a nice sort of new layer so I can delete stuff out, add stuff in. I won't worry about the background. And a bit more there. Let's smooth those little edgy bits out. Alright. And I might add a bit of a big black blobby shape in as well while I've got the black colour in, and got a little bit darker and a little bit more desaturated, just to pull it in further forward. sort of mid-tone there. Use my eyedropper. There. Grab another one that's in between those two tones, and again, grabbing something between the two tones, just as a way of working between those colours. Put a little bit down, and grab some, put a bit more in. On here, I feel like I need a bit more on like the more sort of pillar bits in the background. They sort of die off a bit too much as they move over to the left. So I'm just going to grab some of these colours from the planes of the background and just add a few more sort of bits of stuff in, just to sort of fill it in. I want some stuff in that opening of the gate there to sort of justify its kind of presence. That's looking a bit better. I'm just grabbing some of that colour to blend in and integrate it between things. Some more sort of subtle shapes in the background. I don't have to pay a lot of attention to those. Make sure they're all got a bit of a tip and a tilt to them. Taller ones in the background there. Alright, nice. So now I'm going to start neatening up the shape of my little foreground gate thing here. So adding bits in and leave little divots out for things like the edges of each of the layers of brick there. I won't, it'll be irregular shaped bricks because I can't be bothered doing them regularly. And more here on the other side as well. Might start cutting notches out and then filling them in, and cutting a notch out, filling it in. Figure out where roughly that brickwork would line up on the other side, roughly. Notches there. Grab my colour here for my highlights on it. It's a bit too bright. It's a bit too blue. But I can tune it in after the fact, that's okay. So fill this in. I won't worry too much about the divide between sort of the bricks and so forth. I can always come in and draw the divides in, but I just want to have the broad areas right. Areas of sort of creative vision there. I'll also cut some contour into that. That off. Inside there. And a bit on there. And a bit more off the top. Like a haircut. I'll grab some more of that blue and start working the surfaces along the front. Again, I'm going to neaten these up in a bit. I don't have to worry too much about them. I can carve in little gaps between the brickworks. I just want to get the big surface planes done first. And then I can edit them after the fact. And more down the other side as well. Just being a little careful of those little notches I cut out, otherwise, good. That's looking good. Big sort of broad areas of highlight. Now, I'm going to grab the darker colour. I'll start putting in some of these little bits of the divide between some of the bits of stone. So I'll draw them in, and then I'll switch between the two. So here I'm not doing draw and erase with C on the keyboard. I'm doing the light blue and the dark blue, because I'm all on the same layer, with the keyboard shortcut of X to switch between my two colors, my active colors. And so you can see there, when I switch, I go from using one to the other. So that's how I'm using the same brush to go in and out. And you can see it switch there every time I go between, on the left-hand side there, between that darker blue and the lighter blue. And that's how I'm getting those bits of shaping as well. So I can cut bits out like that, and then I can fill bits in. Bottom bit of the pillar there. And a little bit of a crack across it. Not being too regular or straight with it. I don't have to worry about, you know, this being built to code. It's a post-apocalyptic wasteland of all the various, you know, whatever has happened here. A few more of those notches in against there, so little chips out of the brick as well, not necessarily just cracks along the edges, but just some little chips out of them also. Maybe cutting one of them, a little seam down the side, sort of irregular shaped bricks. And then working down here and trying not to be too regular with it. And again, shadow in, highlight back in. Although a nice big crack down the front here too. Just to really ruin the safety rating. There we go, that's nice. Yeah, I'll take some off the corner there. That's okay. Down the side. Now, even though everything is clearly dead and gone, I might do some little tufts of grass at the bottom there, just to sort of integrate it with the ground. Tuft of grass or straw or whatever can be a really good way of connecting something together. So here you can see one of the handy bits of working with this sort of foreground stuff on a separate layer. I can carve in and out by drawing a blob in and carving it away, and then the background becomes visible there again. So you can keep things like the background and foreground on separate layers, so you can dig them in and out. That can be really handy. And a bit more there. And a bit of sort of integrating shape there, and a bit more sort of tufts of some sort of grassy something. As long as we've got a difference in tone between it and what's going over top of, it will still look like a tuft of something. They don't all have to be the same colour. A bit more on the bottom side, yeah. And a bit more on the sides. That's looking pretty good. Right, I'll grab some of that darker area there and just neaten some elements up to see if they need any. Grab a new layer. Now, what I'm going to do is, I had a suggestion from one of the students that I should put a big sort of flappy bit of fabric, or like a what do you call them? Like a wall scroll or a tapestry, that's it. Or something like a flag hanging from these. And so I thought I might do is give it a bit of a direction of wind that's really sideways and have something like catching on it from the side, like a red cape. But since everything here is all sort of muted and in blues and oranges, red would probably come down to about a purple. So it's a sort of desaturated purple color there. So I've got a new layer. I was going to try and really make sure it goes from like thick to thin and has a really organic sort of flow to the shape here. So I'm just playing with the shape a little bit to try and get that flow. of that flapping sort of cape shape, or a bit of fabric or flag or whatever it used to be from the before times. And just to give it a bit of a visual feature, and also to communicate wind. Anything you can do in a drawing to communicate more elements, like temperature, wind, whatever sort of vibes you can add to a piece, that makes it a more sort of sensory experience, and that really draws your viewer in and gives it the piece more work to do. That's what you really want to do. I'm trying to figure out how I want this thing to sort of flap in the wind. So make this bit a bit bigger and then sort of cut it smooth, I think. That might work. That's looking a bit better. It's got a better flow to it. And then have a bit coming around the other side. And a little bit of notch there, just to give it a bit more angular shape language, so it looks like it's a sort of harsh, sort of pulling folds around the side. Really sort of mess it up a little bit, that should do. Maybe neaten up some of the edges a bit. Looks okay. Smooth those lines and thicken them up in some places. Yeah, that's looking a bit better. A bit more on the side. Look at that edge there just right, because it's not a layer on top, but I've got to make it look like it's coming from behind. That will look more sort of shark taily, I think. Uneven those bits. That's a bit better. Yeah, the shape's looking about right. Cool. I'll lock that layer. And I'll go to a darker one. Now what locking the layer does, this means that I can only work where the layer already is in this layer. So it means I can't paint outside what I've already painted. I can only stay in that part of this layer. When you're doing background, this is probably easier than doing like a clipping layer. If you just want it all to be on one layer, you're okay with the shape. Now you want to work within that shape. So I'm going to grab a little darker over there and just sort of pull it down a bit. Just make a big, broad, bold section of it that's sort of folded over or shaded, that's in shadow. Just to really communicate that sort of mobility and movement of that fabric. Yeah. Maybe a bit coming over there, sort of that sort of fold there, like you get on the elbow of a shirt. And folding under like that as well. That's nice. And taking some out as well. Now I'm going to do the cast shadow. So I've locked that foreground layer so I can't shade outside or draw outside of it. And I'm just going to do some of that dark area for between the bricks to do the shadow that will be cast onto this sort of stone, whatever, by the cape thing in front of it. And now I'm going to go over and do a little bit of a rim highlight for where it'll be catching a bit of that low, bright sort of sunlight, that direct light. Just pulling in some of those little bits of rim of shine, well not shine, but there's a bit of caught light along the edge there. Now I don't want to do too much. If I do too much here, if something is too yellow in this image, that'll put it on the back plane there. So I want to keep it primarily with its current color and current sort of tone and value range, but I want some of that sort of edge of yellow to tie it together and just, it's a nice bit of lighting. A rim light can be quite nice. So figuring out where it would catch some. And then doing some on the buildings in the background as well. I might go a little bit brighter and take it all the way to the edge. That sort of bit of black on the very rim there isn't really working, so I might have to go a bit sort of closer to the edge there. That's much better. Taking it all the way to the edge. Even if it sort of blends a little bit with the yellow of the background, that's okay. The fact that it's a big solid bar of that yellow will carve it out. So I'll make it a tiny bit lighter and a tiny bit yellower. Just those bits that are really close there, I have to go even lighter and even yellower. Bigger smiles, with mouth even more wide open, as it were. Can't use video on the internet, that one. Right, a bit more there for those things that are just super far back. Or at the very top. So as the sun gets lower, things towards the top will catch more light. So the top edges of these things will have a lot more brightness to them. Erase that where I went too far. Okay. Now, I'm just going to grab that foreground layer and I'm just going to lower the saturation a bit. It's just a bit too blue. I feel like there's a bit too much distance between the blue of it and the background. That's up, not down here. Grab the tool back up. Lower the saturation a bit. There, that's much better. Foreground layer as well. That's much better. Now I'm going to grab that scarf. Just going to lift it up a tiny bit. Just to give it the bit of saturation that used to belong, image priority wise, to the sort of stone gate. Last little bits of tuning now. I just want a bit of a darker frame for that foreground there, just to really sort of separate it out. So I was getting a bit too close there, and also maybe throwing in a few little tufts of grass there, just to, I guess, tie into the little bits of grass that I've got in the foreground already, just to sort of make that a bit more sort of fully realized, and maybe throw a little bit of a darker tone in. And now lastly, I'll make a new layer. I'll set it to glow. I'll grab myself a warm color and a big soft airbrush. I'll make sure that the brush density is really low, because I don't want to brush too much in at a time. I want to be very, very gentle with this. And just on the very top, I'm going to just brush in a bit of an orangey glow around there, around the horizon, and just poking through from between the buildings a bit. And again, being very, very gentle with it. That one wasn't quite the right color, so I'm just going to redo that one, but with more of a saturated sort of orange color. And just very, very lightly, with a soft airbrush, brushing some in between the buildings, and a bit more of a sort of glow of it coming from that corner there. Just coming out and just sort of filling that with a sort of orangey glow. Maybe putting some along the edge there where it's sort of catching the light. And just anywhere where you feel like adding a bit more of a sort of glow to it, but again, be very, very sparing with it. Right, with that, we're done. We've got our next image finished. That's 3, time for the 4th. Now this one's probably going to be very useful. This is a beach. Now, a beach can be used for all sorts of stuff. Swimwear episodes, beach holiday episodes, the episode where they go to their relative who owns a beach house. There's so many different things you can do with it. So, to begin with, I've dropped a nice sort of bluey cyan for the sky, and then I'm going to drop a more sort of desaturated cyan over here, and this is just going to be for my skybox. So this is more of a sort of blue than a cyan. So I'm going to have a very sort of hazy horizon, where it gets sort of paler as you get down towards the horizon. You tend to get more of a sort of blue and a more saturated color as you look up, and then as you look down towards the horizon, there's more atmosphere to be seen, which means it gets more sort of cyan and sort of paler and desaturated. That's my skybox. Alright, next thing to do is I'm going to do a layer, and this will be my, essentially the land, or the sea. It'll be the stuff that's underneath the sky. Here, I'm going to use my marquee tool, just so I can grab a big sort of square there, so I can keep it nice and level. And it's going to dump in a big old color there. The paint bucket, and now, with that paler color, I'm going to start working on the general gradient of the sea. And again, it can be streaky. Streaky is good. I've probably been a bit too conservative with my sort of grade there. That initial gradient is really tight, close to the horizon. It's not an even gradient from the horizon down to where you are. The gradient really moves a lot in that first little section close to the horizon, and then it sort of calms down with the amount it changes as it gets closer and closer. I'm just going to get rid of some of that streakiness there. Let's even that out a bit. Okay. But again, a bit of streakiness is good. You'll see the sort of the waves on the horizon making lines along the sea. It's okay to have a bunch of them. That's totally fine. I just sort of move this up a little bit. That's looking alright. Alright, that's looking pretty good. So I'm going then from a blue to a very sort of pale cyan, and now I'm going to go with an almost sort of greeny white, like it's towards the green end of cyan, and it's very desaturated, so it's almost white. I'm just going to have a white that I want to grade to, but I still want a bit of color progression. All right, now I've got that. I'll go for a new layer for the sand. Now this won't have a very hard edge. As the water gets closer to the edge of the sand, you get a sort of blend, and you cover the edge with the sort of sea foam. So I'm just going to block in the sand. There's a bit of a classic shape here, where you'll have the sand going off to one side and then a spit of land off in the distance. So it gives you a good way to have like a bit of sort of buildings and trees and mountains in the distance. And at the same time, you can get some sort of foreground sand there. It's something I got from about 1 million tutorials back when I used to use a few other art tutorial websites. I can't say it doesn't work. And so now, you can see on my sand layer, I'm blending some sand into the sea. I'm going to blend it in. And so I don't want a hard edge to it. I'm going to make a distinction with the surface of the water, but under the water, like if you imagine how it is under the water, it'll be a pretty, blend. It'll go from sand to water. When there's just one drop of water, it looks like sand. When there's 1 million, it's the ocean. So we're just going to have a bit of a blend there as we go, working forward, working in and out, brushing some in, pressing C to switch it into an eraser, and pressing C to go back. So just adding it and subtracting it as we go. And just getting that sort of shape right too, for that little cape, that little spit of sand that comes out. And then a nice, gentle grade, and it can be streaky as well. Streaky is fine. Brush strokes are good. We're painting a thing. We're allowed to have brush strokes on a painting. Alright, there we go. Make a new layer. I'll call this one Clouds. So here, as you would expect, I'm just going to do some clouds. I'll grab some white, and I'll get a fairly big brush, and I'll do a big blob, and I'll do more big blobs. A slightly warmer white can work quite well. So I'll have them, and I'll have a little bottom bit, and I'll cut it off to make that little sort of bottomy traily bit they have. And add some more. And again, brush them in. Make the big bulbousy bits. Cut them out where they're a bit too big. Brush it in, and then cut it out to make the clouds. Very straightforward. Excellent. Now the other side. Right, remember to do different sized blobs of cloud as we go, but see how I do. And a bit more there as we get closer to the horizon as well. And then a little more. And a little more. Now I want to do some really thin bands of cloud as I get really close to the horizon, as things sort of start to disappear over the edge of the horizon. Because unlike what my older relatives seem to think, the Earth is actually round. So we'll do more of some clouds higher up as well, just like really windy clouds, and then really thin little streaks of cloud, really low to the horizon. And the other side as well. There we go. Nice happy little clouds. Maybe a couple little streaks over the water there. Brush them in, erase them out. Might see about a couple of little wisps coming out of the clouds as well, just to sort of characterize them a bit. That looks okay. Right, that's looking okay. Let's go head on back to the sand layer and hit a new layer. So we can have one above it, and we'll call this one land stuff. So this is the stuff that's on the land. Creative naming, I know. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab a bit of a zoomed in view here. And I've got my color ready for it. Now, this is going to be some mountains in the background. So I want kind of a desaturated, pale, sort of grey blue. I want to be a bit too... Yeah, that's a bit darker, that's a bit nicer. Because as things get further away, they get more blue, or more sort of blue cyan, and they get more desaturated. So it's quite a desaturated, sort of bluish color. Do sort of an edge of the mountains. And then I'll realize that I'm painting on top of clouds. Oh, sorry, under clouds, not on top of them. Whoopsie doopsie. Try to get sort of more irregular shape to them if I can. And then back. And then just sort of fill in those shapes a bit. Again, it's got a small element of a background, so I don't have to worry too much about getting the details super duper duper dialed in. But I just want to have some of those sort of Pacific Island kind of mountains you get. Since all of them are very sort of young islands, they've got that lovely sort of pointiness you get. And now I'm just going to get slightly lighter colour and add in just a couple of little bits of where they sort of pick up some planes or highlights, just to give some character to them, just some shapes. Not really much organization to the shapes. I'm just sort of thinking where there'd be flat faces on the mountain range, or where there could be flat faces. But again, it doesn't have to be a lot of detail at all, and doesn't even have to make a lot of sense. So the viewer will figure it out themselves. They're clever. It's pretty good. A little bit on the one in the background there. I can reuse the highlight color. It's fine. Right, very good. Now with this color, we go a little bit darker. And I'll do the reverse. I'm just going to put a couple of little specks of where to be sort of casting some big mountain shadows or some divides. Ready. And now I just tilted the hue very, very slightly towards green. It's still very much in blue. It's not even at full cyan yet, but already it kind of feels like it has a greenish tint to it. It doesn't. You can look at the color wheel right there. I'm working on a sort of blue cyan. But if I tilt it a little warmer, it'll look like a green. And at a distance, that is kind of the thing. It'll be a green with a whole bunch of cyan added to it. And so now I'm just doing some building shapes in front of that with a nice sort of pale color. I think I'm just reusing the cloud color, in fact, of those nice sort of white buildings. This is based off the few visits I've had to Brisbane with their giant sort of seaside big white apartment complexes. I think they're white because it reflects a lot of the sunlight so they don't get too hot. And a few of them, like a fairly tall one out in the water there. And a little structured little sort of stone thingy in the beach there. I forget what you call them, but when we get like big storms, sometimes see them sort of popping through the sand. And that's the wrong color there. Grab that darker mountain color and just sort of allude to some of the shapes of the buildings. I'm going to do a lot, just sort of adding some vertical and horizontal lines to them and letting the viewer sort of fill in the rest. And some dark lines there. Maybe it's a street, maybe it's the bottom edge of the building, who knows. Looking pretty good. And again, you can see it's just a very small part of it, but it's actually a fairly detailed little section, and it's likely to be visible too, if we do end up adding a character to it. But we may not. We'll see how we do. Alright, new layer. I'm going to call this layer the wash. So this is going to be some white. Now, just like I've shown you with the last few, I'm going to paint it in, and then I'm going to erase it out. And paint it in, and erase it out. When I'm painting the wash in, I want to make sure it's thickest towards the edge, and it covers over that area of transition between the sand and the water. And I'm going to erase this out to show little holes in the wash, and through those holes in the wash, you're going to see the sand color go to the watercolor. I'll try and make sure I'm not being too regular with the little sort of shapes of the wash. I'm really going to fill that out in big rounded shapes like that. That's good. And now, I'm going to start doing these little circle shapes in it. Now, try and be irregular with these as well, and try not to be too regular. These, I don't have to worry too much about them. I'm going to be cutting them with this brush and turned into an eraser to get the width right of those little sort of cells. But this is that sort of interconnected mesh of those lines of bubbles you get in the wash in the ocean. I'm going to try and be irregular with it. And I'll sort of try and shrink it down a little bit as I go. I'm going to do a bunch of this and then erase it out. So this is essentially you can think of this as like wood carving, where you get the block of wood, the right sort of shape and size, and then you carve the details out of it. I've got these in, and now I can start working to and fro. And so you can see I'll start carving out some of this white to reveal that transitional sort of sand to water underneath. And I want to leave the thickest part of the wash towards the very edge there. Like the thickest part of remaining white is going to be along the edge where it touches the beach. So I'll get it all and cut it all to nice sort of thin shapes, but I'll make sure the thickest bit is that edge. So I'm just wiping more out there along that edge. And I'll switch back to the brush and just thicken that edge bit up a bit more. That looks great. And I'll start cutting these in. I'll make them some parts really, really thin, some parts kind of thick. I want that irregularity of thickness of these sections. I want some parts to be stretched really thin. I want some parts to be bunched up, little wadges of bubbles. And I'll try to make sure that I keep my overall shapes stretched out horizontally. I don't have too many tall vertical shapes. I want to have a lot more horizontal shapes. I want to keep to that flow of that line coming around the edge of the beach there. Because if you can imagine this was all out in the open ocean, it'd be all nice and even. But since this is part of the wash that's being pushed up against the sand with the waves, that means these shapes are being compressed and pushed by that surge of water that they're riding on top of. That's smushing them up against the sand, and it's smushing those shapes against it. So I'll fill in this to sort of subdivide some of these larger shapes. That's looking better. There. That's good. And maybe having some of the little bits of wash come into these little cells of no wash. The no wash cell. Sounds like a Discord I used to be on. Alright. More in there. And around the edges. Like that. And just getting rid of some of these wider sort of bits of wash. Making sure they don't have any of those sort of leftover bits that haven't already had some of them chiseled off. Maybe making some bits thicker while I'm there. Who knows? And just shaving some away. Like that. And being extra harsh when I'm shaving away the ones that get further away, because as things get further away, we draw them smaller. So, as these bits move further into the distance, we're going to cut them in more and more and more as they get further away. And there as well. A bit more out of that. That was nice. And cutting into these shapes as well. And just spending a bit of time on these. I could probably be a bit more methodical with these, but this particular part of the drawing exercise for me, I find incredibly meditative. I could probably do this, instead of sort of weaving baskets when they come to take me away. I think I'll draw the little gaps between bits of ocean wash. I think that's probably the most relaxing thing I can imagine. Okay, the most relaxing thing I can imagine is the sound of wind through rice fields. I used to have that on my commute to work, and it was the most peaceful sound ever. I'm trying to find a recording of it. I know it's a very specific thing, but yeah, the sound of wind over rice paddies is just the most relaxing noise anywhere. And I found a million recordings on YouTube of coffee shops, birds and rain and so forth, but just not that. If any of you find it, shoot me a link. And a few more little sort of skerricks to this. I want to have a bit of a reflection of the clouds on the water, just to sort of tie that together. I'm just going to do a few sort of scumbled shapes here and then partially erase all of them, just to sort of allude to that. Put that in there, and then a bit of a soft eraser just to pale it out a bit. Looks nice. Now, I'm just going to jump onto the clouds layer for a second. I'm going to tune some of those shapes. I'm staring at some of these for a minute or two, so smooth one of them out. Alright, now I'm going to lock the sand color. The sand layer. So that means that I can't sort of paint any new areas. And what I'm just going to do is I'm going to grab a slightly darker color there, and I'm just going to blend in a color. It's a little bit of darker version of the sand, a bit more orange, a tiny bit. Just for that sort of bit of wet sand, where it's just sort of receding over the sand and it's been sort of darkened by it. I'll throw a bit more there on the city edge there as well. Sorry, I accidentally dropped a bit of blue there. Alright, I'll grab that sand color again. I'll go for a little bit of a darker version of it. A little bit way there, a bit more back in. And you can see I've got them both as my two selected colors. So I'm pressing X to switch between them so I can go up and down between those two colors and just gently, with very soft strokes, just adding a bit of a gentle transition between that sort of wet sand and the dry sand. And then also adding just some darker little speckles of sand, just to essentially change it from sand being just an area of sand color to sand with a bit of texture, like some little bits of fold or ripples in the sand. A little sort of, not dunes, but just, kicked up little ridges of sand from the beach there. And once I've got them in, I might just go over them again and just sort of soften them up a bit, just so they're not looking too sort of hard and chiseled. And maybe break them up a little bit, make them a little bit more irregular. Again, you don't need too much here, just some stuff to show that this is a beach and that the sand is not completely flat. That's all you need. Alright, now I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to put it underneath the wash, and I'm going to rename this one the Wash Shadows. Now this one's going to sit underneath the wash, and there's a little bit of a dark edge underneath them. It's a whole lot of foam and bubbles, but it's going to cast a shadow. So I'm going to grab where it's over the water, I'm going to do a multiply shading underneath the wash in a blue of the ocean. And that's going to give that a bit of height. The bubbles are going to look like they've got a bit of height to them. So I've got my layer that's sitting underneath the wash, and that layer is set to multiply, and I'm painting with a sort of cyan color, and that's going to darken it a little bit. But you can see as I get closer to the sand here, that color looks a little out of place. So what I'm going to have to do once I get to the actual sand is I'll have to change the color I'm shading with, and so I have to start shading with the sand color. So now I'm just coming back into those bits right out of the wash and cutting some out. Because I want it there, but I want it really, really thin. I also want it to be really uneven. I don't want it to be the same thickness. Bubbles aren't regular. Now I'm doing the same thing under the very, very edge of the wash, and just darkening that just a tiny bit underneath the wash, just to show that little lip of shadow that it's casting on the sand there. And again, there's not much to it, it's just that little lip of shadow, just to separate it out. And don't have to bother with any of it for the background wash, because it's too far away for you to see that. Now I'm just going to lock the clouds layer, switch over to it. So I've got the transparency lock, not the regular lock. And I'm just going to do just a few bits of shadow there, just to give them a bit of shape. Don't think too hard about it. Don't do any small shapes. Big, bold shapes. Shadows can be big on clouds. They can cast big cloud shadows on big bits of cloud. Have whole sections, whole sort of blobs of cloud shaded all the way out. So don't be a coward, or a cloud coward, or a cloudwood. That's not a real word. A bit there, and just work up and down. I'll probably do. Just to fill that bit in. That'll do, I think. Now, I'm just going to add a couple of little 1 or 2 details onto the sand just to make it a bit less plain. So I'll grab this sort of brown color here, which is quite a reddy brown. And I'm just going to do some just shapes for some, just some rocks. Just because it's a bit too sort of plain there. I want a little bit of bits of detail on the left-hand side there, so I'll just put in some rock shapes. And then I'll get a paler color and just drop some lighter areas of rock in. So the top surface of the rock and maybe a bit of the side planes, maybe. Side sort of lit section there. A bit more on the side there as well. Rocks can be nice on the beach. It gives you something for the character to sit on. If they are sitting on something, or leaning something on there to put their phone or whatever, or maybe it's it's a feature you can use it to shape the beach. I'll do another little rock sort of protruding out next to it, just to sort of make that transition a bit more sort of sensical between sort of sandiness and rockiness. There's not just one big boulder poking out of nowhere. And again, you can see I'm working the base shapes in with the darker color of rock, and then I'm going over the top of it with that sort of paler color. And now I'm going to put a little bit of transitional color in between of that darker area of sand where the rock meets the sand. Because it'll have sort of an ambient occlusion light there, as well as it probably, holds moisture closer to the rock or something, maybe, I'm not sure. I'm not a rockologist. That is the term, not geologist, rockologist. And now, I've got a new layer on top, set the screen, and I just did a bit of a glow, and I'm going to chisel it back out. So I've got my big soft airbrush, and I just want to have a bit of a sort of pick up glow from the clouds there. I've got to keep chiseling it back out as well. I want to have a bit of it, but I don't have too much of it. Maybe a little bit on the tops of the distance there, just to sort of really sort of blue them out a bit. And now on the ocean, I'm just going to see about a couple of little fine details. So again, I'll grab my sketching brush. That's just that airbrush, the soft airbrush with the softness turned off. And just add some streaks there, just to give the water a bit of sort of character and detail. Just a couple of random streaks, just to really characterize it, and then a couple of random light streaks on there. And making sure I use a smaller and smaller brush as I get closer to the horizon. With that, we are largely done. We've got the sky, the clouds, the water, the sand, and the wash all painted in. Now, there is of course one other element, the secret brush. I know I said there wasn't one, but there is. This is the one you use to paint in the character. It's magic, and it does everything. How does it work? I don't know. It's magic, that's the whole point. And so, using that brush here, I can just quickly brush in a detailed character over the top of the background I've painted. And that's that brush there. I'll link that brush in the description. How does it work? It's very simple. Firstly, you draw the entire character. Sketch, ink, flats, shading, highlights. Then, you alpha them out with an alpha mask. And then, drawing the alpha mask, you fade them back in. Easy. And that's how that brush works. Now I hope you enjoyed the video. There's going to be a couple more backgrounds in future. I painted a few more than just these 4, and I realized with 4 of them, it's about 2 hours, so there'll be another part 2 of this probably that has a few more. If there's any sort of backgrounds you'd like to see in these, let me know what you'd like to draw along with. I'll also be including some more background focused draw alongs in the 1:1 speed draw along sort of mini series that runs concurrent to this. And there's also some videos coming up on things like focused anatomy on arms, legs, hands, etc. So that'll be coming up as well. And look forward to, hopefully, a review of a fancy new toy very shortly. But with that, then, I'll let you go. If you like the video and you want to support the channel, like, subscribe, comment to feed the algorithm. If you have any questions, I do read all the comments, so leave an actual comment asking me any questions you have about the process we've gone through, or things you'd like to see in future videos. If you did decide to draw along with one or more of these paintings, that is fantastic. I would love to see them. So pop into the Discord, linked in the description, post it there. I really can't wait to see it. I do check through all of them. I'm not able to give feedback on them all anymore because there's more than 3 of you. And so I do look at all of them. I do see them. I absolutely love them. And I can't wait to see them. Otherwise, I will catch you in the next one. You have a good one. Cheers. Bye.